We are now going to remove the input shaft. There's nothing holding the input shaft onto the main shaft at this point. I want to show you something here. There are teeth that match up to the synchro ring. Well, there's a section that's cut away that has no teeth. What you're going to do is line that cutaway section with the counter shaft. So you're going to turn it down so that it lines up with the counter shaft, and then you're going to remove the input shaft by pulling it out. Now, when you do that, the brass synchro is going to come loose. You're going to have some bearings inside here. The best way to do it is to put a little downward pressure on this shaft. That raises this end just slightly, getting some of the pressure off of the input shaft and the counter shaft gear, and then it will slide out a little easier. It takes a little wiggling. I'm going to go ahead and take out the input shaft. So the tail shaft is on the right. The input shaft has these teeth that look similar to the synchronizer, but there is a cutout section right here, and that cutout section is rotated so that it lines up with the gears on the counter shaft. And then you put a little downward pressure on this end, that lifts this end up a little bit, and then with a little wiggling you can remove the counter shaft. The counter shaft comes out, and there's a couple of things to keep track of. There's the synchronizer ring, and then, hold on, I'll set that down. There's the synchronizer ring, and there is a flat race. The flat race may have stuck inside the input shaft, but the race is what those bearings run on inside the transmission. Then there is a flat wafer type bearing. Then inside the input shaft are 15 roller bearings, and I'll take them out. They look like that. Of course, this has lots of goo to keep them in place, but they may have tumbled out. There should be 15 of them. And then of course you want to set this the input shaft aside in a safe place, and you may need to replace it. So here's the end of the main shaft, and this end right here, let's see if it focuses. This should have a nice smooth polished finish. It should not be rounded off on the end. If it's rounded off on the end, then your main shaft may not be in good enough shape to use. The reason it needs to have a nice flat surface and just a little chamfer on the end is because that's what is lining up with these 15 roller bearings, and that surface is very important. They're rotating constantly when the transmission is moving. Now that you have the input shaft removed, you might want to consider doing the Jeep input shaft swap. The requirements for this are, it's an S10 transmission with a 14 spline input shaft and 21 gear teeth. This one still has the bearing on it. This one is an S10 shaft with the bearing removed. 21 gear teeth. The nice thing about the Jeep shaft swap is that it has 21 gear teeth, so it's the correct gear pattern for your transmission. But it has 10 splines, and those 10 splines match up with the Chevy bolt pattern, and it's also a thicker transmission shaft, so it's a little stronger than the S10. Plus you'll notice side by side how the splines travel down the shaft a little further than this does, and that eliminates the need for an adapter plate.